Tenzin Dorjee
Let us cultivate the altruistic motivation, seeking complete enlightenment for the sake of liberating infinite, kind, mother sentient beings. With that kind of bodhicitta motivation, that we should all participate in this teaching. The teaching that I have been giving you is based on this very wonderful text called Miscellaneous collection of Kadampa Geshe's personal advices, and this text contains personal advices from great Kadampa Geshes, beginning with the great Adisha. We have just cultivated the altruistic motivation that aspires for complete enlightenment for the benefit of all other sentient beings. So what is contained in our altruistic motivation or bodhicitta motivation is the highest spiritual goal that we are seeking, which is complete enlightenment or Buddhahood. In order to be able to realize this complete enlightened state, it is a must that we study and cultivate what is known as the two dimensions of Buddha's teaching and path. And these are, one, we called extensive dimension of the path, Gachevalam in Tibetan, and then there is the profound dimension of the path, so these two dimensions of the path of teaching need to be studied and cultivated in our mind to be able to become a complete enlightened person.
Tatendiga Lamjurba Nishinani, and a Tomara and a Jackie Lanjurba logo, but any Sanji jumped in the round, the Kanang written, and a Kraseka wanted to get those Kanang.
So, of these two aspects or the dimensions of the path that we could follow, leading us to complete enlightened state, great masters, from historical teachers, Shakyamuni Buddha, and down through in the other great commentators of his teachings have advised us, generally speaking, to cultivate the extensive aspect of the path, or the extensive dimension of the path first, and then cultivate the profound dimension of the path. So then the question arises, how do we go about studying and cultivating what is known as the extensive aspect or the dimension of the path, which could probably also be translated as a skillful dimension of the path. And as we find it laid out in great Lamrim treatises, Lamrim is the Tibetan term which means stages of the path, and so in the Lamrim treatises such as the Lamb of Path to Enlightenment, and also the Lamrim treatises authored by great Tibetan master Manjushri Lama Tsongkhapa or Rinpoche, what we find is there's a presentation of what is known as the paths of three types of practitioner, the paths and practices of the three types of practitioners, in Tibetan called Kyebusum Jilam Jirimba. And so within these three paths and practices of the three types of practitioner, we find all the extensive aspects or the dimension or the skillful dimensions of the path leading to complete enlightened state. As a matter of fact, in Lamrim treatises, we find a complete structure of the path laid out that begins with cultivating proper relationship with qualified spiritual gurus or lamas or masters, just to be simple called guru devotion, and then all the way to accomplishing the complete enlightened state, which is called the state of non-trainees, literally translating, which means now you don't need any more training. You are already a Buddha. So Lamrim presents complete structure of the path from guru devotion all the way to the realization of enlightenment. So it is important and essential for us to listen to Lamrim teachings, contemplate them, and meditate on them. And through this, what we call traditional approach of listening, contemplation and meditation, we call Kesam Komsum, that we should be able to grow spiritually. And of course, then one of the questions we could ask ourselves is, when do we start doing that? Well, of course, we should do it from this moment, because we should not procrastinate doing that to some later time, as great masters such as Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Shantideva advises us.
That condition show you none. Me to Latin and the Doma Cho children. Don't the sin in Yaka, remember to Imalos, and they don't make gentle daggers. They drive a Shabalapena that 2 9 that 10 Zambuki Togers, 10 around Toyers, me 10 Zambuki, that Jinjo Jutson immediately Toyers. So then the topic also don't make it solid part day to but share some tangers. Matodan, then dig any yes, any the legal Lutin Chabaji toy the Kira cover is gone.
In his Guide to Bodhisattva's Way of Life, or Bodhisattva Child Avatar, we in Tibetan call Chinju, Great Shantideva states thus, as Geshe quoted the stanza from his memory: having found this useful boat, is the metaphor, we should make efforts to cross the ocean of suffering, and just don't waste our time sleeping, because once we lose this boat, it would rather be very difficult to find it over and again. So the message that Shantideva is giving us is this: that in order to grow spiritually, and especially to become a Buddha, it is essential for us to find the most suitable life basis, which is no other than the precious human life that we all have found now. So this precious human life and body of ours is like a boat that we should use to cross the water or the ocean of suffering. And if we don't do that, if we simply kind of waste our life in the enjoyment of napping and sleeping, then once we lose this life at the boat, it would be very difficult to find this kind of life over and again.
No. That in this one, don't get solid dog with Tayin, you know, don't get sote. Hako Gugars, don't get me, but Muki Gugars.
So we need to use this boat of precious human life and body to cross the ocean of, to put it in another way, ocean of the 2 types of mental obscuration. And of course, we need to educate ourselves about what are the 2 types of mental obscuration that we must get rid of to become a Buddha.
Mitchell Gindal doing the Chani, Ranta Gin doing the Chanting Moguan to the Shin, and go Naya Tachi. Gave it doing it and dying and looking how quiet, give it doing it at Koguore, Navi doing it at Koguore, Rawa, and they chew doing it at Koguore, Mate Ye, Cabores, I'm going to do it, but I'm doing what is Mongoyers.
So in order to cross the ocean of suffering, we really need to realize what suffering is and the extent of suffering. And so we may kind of feel that, yeah, we know what suffering is like. I mean, I can see this in other people's lives. They are crying with pain, or I cry with pain. There is a suffering. I get a headache. No, that's no pleasure. I see people getting old, and then all the problems related with aging, and how people die, and they are so heartbroken. So I know what suffering means. Well, we only know a part of the story of the suffering. We really don't know, the extent of the suffering.
That don't 동해 해봐 저쪽 동해 때에 다 동해 만들어 지금 숨이어res.
When our historical teacher Shakyamuni Buddha gave his first teaching called first sermon sometimes, he talked about the Four Noble Truths in many different ways, and during which he said, first we should know about suffering. Understand suffering, he said. Well, then, what is suffering? Then he talked about, of course, three types of suffering that we should understand. So the three types of suffering that we must realize are suffering of misery or suffering of suffering, in Tibetan, suffering of change, in Tibetan, and pervasive suffering or So these are the three categories of suffering that we must understand. So when we feel or say that, well, we do know what suffering is like, what suffering feels like, our understanding of suffering is pretty much confined to one of these three types of suffering, which is called suffering of suffering or suffering of misery. Why is it called suffering of suffering? It's because all of us have what is called pervasive suffering. Now, on top of that, it's like we got a double suffering. On top of that suffering, we got another suffering, and that's why it's called suffering of suffering. And so our understanding of suffering is pretty much confined to the first category of suffering called suffering of suffering.
사직 대화 정말로 단 주의 등이 차고요.
Now we really don't recognize suffering of change or understand it. This kind of suffering includes all kinds of what we call comforts and pleasures, or even happiness that we know of. These contaminated, as we would say, happiness that we experience is, as a matter of fact, a form of suffering. It is called suffering of change. So that's why we talk about, a particular kind of a misconception or distorted conception that we have. Tibetan term is called lokshe. A distorted perception or conception that we have is we see, misperceive, or regard that which is in reality suffering as something happiness or pleasurable. So we, in other words, consider that whatever temporary comforts and pleasures that we experience in our life are as if these are the real happiness or the true happiness. But that is a distorted conception.
And say that on say Chinese say the long journey anything use nani. Say Latin nagadons. And the hard in the Dambo draw and Dabadina, draw dignity, Susie any pay same devil that you and your kid ready in a tamade. And it's a dolly China with the Mundo, that's enjoyed to Harris. And they Tambo Deva, they were temperature, but you don't hear, they were the donation wallet. Pan Jundovatil, you don't miss. Then Benedetta was you. You might know that day, you might South Indies and dinner days, then you might take on the sun. Then you dare China, see the young, and not doing your inquiry. Now, Tom pay Tom company, Thomas on the sum, yeah, Thomas and it, Tom Tavi in the day, Tom will do it there. There is a Tom could some be Deva, they do make him all in Panjurni. That do see your Charles, summer local social Sankatoma tactician, Mikiake Amaris.
Let me give you a few examples of suffering of change, and I think if we probably could all relate to these examples or many more of the same or a similar kind. Let's first take pleasure that we derive from eating our favorite food. Because of our attachment to certain food, when we get the chance to eat the food we like very much, in the beginning we enjoy it very much. That gives us a lot of pleasure and delight. But then if we are not careful, with eating, if we overeat, then it could kick up problems. And so now we may not digest what we have eaten, or it could also cause sickness. So this is an example of how what we may consider as really pleasure, it gets into, or it leads to suffering, or it changes into suffering. Take another example here, that we like to find friends and companions, and so we find each other, and we like it very much, and so it seems like there's so much pleasure and happiness to begin with. And then after a while, now things are not working out, and now we don't want to even see each other or be with each other. Now it just we consider ourselves as very close friends, and now we have almost become like enemies, or we are enemies, and we just want to be separated and don't want to see each other. So this is also a good example of how something we consider as if it brings us real happiness in the beginning, finding friendship or companionship, but later leads to separation and headaches and hostility and all of that. And I also often give this example, that is first when we feel cold and we go out in the sun, let's say sun bathing, well, that looks like a lot of pleasure and happiness, and gives us the warmth, and we feel so good. Now if we stay too long in the sun, well, this pleasure is really not retaining, Now we started to get burned, and it's getting too hot, and we want to move into shade. And so being in the shade at the beginning seems like, wow, this feels so cool, very nice. Now we stayed too long in the shade, we started to freeze, and now we want to go to the sun, see? So the pleasures we derive from, like being in the sun or being in the shade, it changes. Afterwards, it doesn't really, stay as it is. So these are good examples, and I think if we pay attention to our own experiences of these kinds, we will get a hang of. We will start to understand what suffering of change is. And I think we find plenty more examples, like think about, smoking or drinking or taking drugs. I guess, at the beginning it all seems to be very, cool and, seems like, fun thing to do and, brings certain amount of pleasures, or maybe. But then once we really get into these things, too deep into this, then they kick so many problems, health issues, and so many other problems.
So
So I hope these few examples, illustrate the point that I'm trying to make. What suffering of change means, something that we consider as if it brings us true happiness or real happiness or pleasure. It really isn't. It changes into misery and suffering. Now, the third kind of suffering that we talk about is called pervasive suffering, or Tibetan. Now, this is a case where, as long as we have what we call aggregates, or a body, for example, which is the result of contaminated karmic actions and delusions. So long as we keep taking rebirth under the influence of contaminated karmic actions and delusions, we will have this kind of a suffering called pervasive suffering. So the first thing Shakyamuni Buddha told us is we should understand suffering, the nature of suffering, the extent of suffering. But then what's the point of doing that? The point of understanding suffering is then we really get interested to find out what brings us all these sufferings that we really don't want. So we are going to find the source of suffering. So first thing Buddha said is you should realize or understand suffering, and then he said you should abandon the cause of suffering or the source of suffering. So when Buddha said abandoned cause of suffering, of course it's not just talking about one single cause. As I just mentioned, we have to understand there is the karmic cause, and then there is the delusional cause, or delusion as a cause. So we need to get rid of both this karmic cause and delusion from which sufferings come about.
Until Pai Shabby, Zawe Ninium, that's all the Marik Bashi, the Patili Jesus Shabin, Zawe Yomosunshi, Tatili Pai Gir Tambina, and it's a new Trushi. Then in Pashi, then Yomojeri, those Tenzo Kangat Samalo, that your most wins in race.
So again, delusion or nyomo, kleshya in Sanskrit, is not a single phenomenon. It is a whole world in itself, as you might say. And we have as many as 84,000 delusions or forms of delusion in each of us. And so when we look at the root delusions, we can talk about three poisons or three root delusions. Of course, the underlying delusion is ignorance, avidya or mariba. And from it arises other delusions such as anger and attachment. So these are called three poisonous delusions or three delusions. And from these delusions arise more delusions. So we can talk about different classifications of delusions. We can talk about three poisonous delusions, we can talk about 6 primary delusions, and then from these delusions arise all the remaining delusions. So the complete list of delusions consists of 84,000 delusions.
Magi Changwa Mare, Saki gave later, Saki gave later, and then you mutually to the late Kunju Chagari.
And the karmic source of the cause, called Lejikunju, of our suffering, it consists of not only the negative karmas or the bad karmas, but also positive karmas which are contaminated by delusions. So that's why I often use the word contaminated karmic actions, meaning both good and karmas, which all of it are contaminated. So these contaminated karmic actions are also, causes of our misery.
So that Tangaranzo, Lozunshi, the Cardisana, Chugo Lozunshi, Abu Shebashi, the need Tenda the sum, the need Gom Chego Cardisana, later your monkey, I think with the Paya Chidris.
And we are engaged in Dharma education, if you like. We participate in Dharma teachings, and the purpose behind our Dharma education is and should be that first we learn about Dharma, or not about Dharma, we learn what Dharma is, and then we contemplate Dharma or spirituality, and then we cultivate spirituality or do the meditation. And the sole purpose of doing all of these things, listening, contemplation, meditation, or study, contemplation, thinking, and meditation, is to counteract contaminated karmic actions and delusions, all of which reside inside us.
So that in the Marajo South, the Migi later is that give me guitar Saki, going a Saki, Saki, Migi later, and then Yamota Yomope, and then Yomope, and then Yomoni, but Mapana, and then Tabe Combatoya Mavata.
So the two causes of suffering are contaminated karmic actions, which include, of course, negative actions, but also positive actions which are contaminated by delusions, and all types of delusions. Now, if we don't get rid of, if we don't eliminate contaminated karmic actions and delusions from within our mind, there is no way to find nirvana, or there's no way to find enlightenment. Now, if asked, when will we be able to find nirvana or liberation? Great Indian realized master scholar Aryadeva has said, as Geshe quoted the line, which says, "You find nirvana or liberation from samsara at the end of exhausting contaminated karmic actions and delusions." In other words, whenever we put an end to our contaminated karmic actions and delusions, at that point of time, we find liberation, nirvana, nibbana.
Yes.
Now, all these two causes of suffering, contaminated karmic actions and delusions, delusions are, more problematic and worse causes of suffering. That's because motivated by delusions or, undergirded by delusions, we create and accumulate karmic actions. Let's consider this. When we think about how we ourselves or others find them engaging in the 10 negative actions of body, speech, and mind, Generally, it is because of one of the three poisonous delusions instigate us to do it. Of course, always there is pretty much ignorance underlying there, and then it could be the attachment that makes us indulge in negativities, or it could be the anger or hatred that makes us indulge in negativities. So basically, the delusions are causing us to engage in negative karmic actions.
Rank Lutang never see at any Ranjuli in the jacket of Timusunki, Wanki, Tashi, Resting, Hakovashe, sometime.
So we need to understand that when we hurt others or harm others, it is basically because of our delusions. Because of delusions such as ignorance, attachment, and anger inside us, that we harm others through the actions of our body, speech, and mind.
No less. That thing around Samalo, Mundu pay Darita, Mundu trained of his data, not Samalo pay killing a few beans.
So I thought, those things are really something beneficial to all of us, and that's why I have taken a little bit of a time here to talk about those things. So consider that as my preliminary teaching, and now we will go into the text where we left off last time.
That day, because then there's something about Tana, Ram, Meva, Zongit, Ranjili, Yupe, and Yomote Chaguaris.
If we think seriously, what really destroys us is actually the delusions inside us.
No, less. That thing I need to Savage, that isn't that good something.
No.
Young Geshes singer with Hennesseta, he sing of Dam Dosum. Sir, my condition, I condition in a Dandos Macana. Sir Gonzaga Datons, which is Daniel Latini, Nemo, but the schedule to that Japanese. Maranzo Ranjula, any Rangula, Nemo, but Mango Chuji doas, pay a Jenny. You ever some as a pay Jenny, touching the Loman and pay a Jenny. She had the courage ever send Ranjula Yupe, and then Church Data, Gonzaga Daniel, but the Chevres Canando.
Great Kadampa Geshe Jangaba tells us that because of the two types of grasping at selves that we have, grasping at the self of a person and grasping at the self of phenomena, all other delusions arise from these two graspings and they flourish. It is as if these two graspings produce delusions of all kind, and then these delusions they flourish. They increase in us like anything. It is sort of like watching a tree grow and produce foliages and all the leaves going crazy.
So that didn't the but in the water bag. You must join them in your soul at Tali Shomas. That time you move showing Kandikina. Only you soul at Tawa Seta, dancing like in Shomas.
Another great realized Indian Buddhist scholar, master scholar Acharya Chandrakirti, has also said, as Geshe quoted the lines from his memory, that we should understand that all kinds of delusions they arise from what is called, literally translating here, the view of transitory collection, or the transitory view, Jitolatawa in Tibetan, Jikta, the view of transitory collection. So what is the view of transitory collection? If you ask, it is basically the graspings that we just mentioned.
No. Girls or course girls and shit and die you know but the singular tada and dancing in the dance concept dancing church dancing the shower race 이나야 고 고세 디니지 나네 콜 당가죠 간사가 코네 never serious 말한서 never saying 디니지나 단지니진 조 간사가 당지 never saying 도와스 가능
Geshe Tsultim tells us that in a general sense that all kinds of harms come about from the two types of grasping at the self of a person and grasping at the self of phenomena. That being said, but at a personal level, so to speak, what really is harming us, a lot more, so to speak, is actually grasping at the self of a person.
So the concept dancing like any tell a the church that the moon of Tamalo, tell a
So it is from our grasping at the self of a person, other delusions such as attachment, and anger and jealousy and all come about.
You don't want to chat. You don't want to control. Ane Pamela Tanya, Yorando, Pama Yorando, then Samalo, Ane Danzi Maruba Tenta, that is somewhere.
Because of grasping at the self of a person, when we encounter pleasant or attractive objects, we experience attachment to them. Because of grasping at the self of a person, when we encounter unpleasant objects or unattractive objects, we dislike them and we hate them. We become angry with them. And because of our grasping at the self of a person, when we encounter beings who are neither our friends nor our enemies, called strangers, then we experience indifferent attitude. We don't care about them.
So that Marancho never so you pay Pala Guy, the larger the carriers and the never so the carriers and any Kazakh data is.
So our job is to knock out or to destroy grasping at the self of a person.
That the language about the change of tone lies in your matters. She tank Tangaran to Zepe and then change of tone like a yamaris, La Yamaris.
But this grasping at the self of a person needs to be destroyed, needs to be knocked out, but we cannot do it with any kind of conventional weapons.
Kansak dad pan zing sake, then zinyak lakan carresena, turba to samba, kobeker, sambaker, gombeker of sumchitoni. Then zinguer.
So if conventional weapons of all kinds that we manufacture in factories, artillery factories are of no use to destroy grasping at the self of a person, then what kind of a weapon should we fashion and use to fight it? So the kind of weapon that we need is cultivating different types of wisdom, related to or arising from listening, contemplation, and meditation. So through cultivating wisdoms arising from listening, contemplation, and meditation on Dharma teachings, we could use those wisdoms to counteract grasping at the self of a person.
Ko meba zoela da chonje ji go yor je zo chonje da rang zo go do was the zodang nan zoya man do was.
So the point that we should get out of this is we do need weapons to destroy our grasping at the self of a person, but the weapons are not something that others can manufacture in factories and we can buy them from them. But the weapons are something that we ourselves need to personally make or cultivate. So we need to cultivate the weapon-like wisdoms in our own mind to fight off with the grasping at the self of a person. Now I wonder whether somebody is thinking about, okay, and I understand that we cannot buy the weapons, conventional weapons to fight off with this grasping, but how about can I rent, something from Buddha or gurus or bodhisattvas that I can just rent from them some kind of weapons that I can fight off with this grasping? Sorry, you cannot rent anything here. Our historical teacher Shakyamuni Buddha has been absolutely clear, categorically clear about this matter, that he cannot lend to you or we cannot rent anything from him. In our sutra, sutra contains the words of original words of Buddha. Shakyamuni Buddha himself said, I cannot, or Buddhas cannot remove your suffering with their hand. And he also said that nor can I wash your negativities with water, or I can transfer my realizations into you, as if we can do some kind of a surgery and take out all our delusions and negativities, and then Buddha can put all their realizations into our organs. We cannot do such transplants of realizations or transference of realizations. So if Buddha cannot transfer their realizations into us, then that is very clear that we cannot rent anything from them. Their realizations are not for rent. So that then number of tuba mebaki, Dizela Teni, Dizeta Yansulani, and it take the Jane Quatang so doing the progress. So if Buddhas cannot wash our negativities and delusions with blessed water, they cannot remove the sufferings from us with their hands, enlightened hands, they cannot transfer or transplant their realizations into our mind, then what can they do really? Well, Buddha himself is clear about answering this question. He said, what we can do is that we will show you the truth as it is, the reality as it is, and by seeing the reality, you should be able to liberate yourself, free yourself. And so what Buddha has done is has shown us the unmistaken path and the truth as it is. And so if we follow the Buddha's teaching and experience the truth as it is, through this kind of experience and realization, which has to come about through our practice and cultivation, that we ourselves should be able to free or liberate ourselves from delusions and suffering. That is that. The reason Dandinella Soyatani, Tosam, Tebata, Sambata, Gomba Sumchi, any Herepchis, Heredrangi Shevacheni, the any date, that Zimbata, the never saw it, Zogres Canando. So, in other words, as Geshe Jagaba has said here, that it is through cultivating wisdoms, from listening to teaching, contemplating the meaning of the teaching, and meditating on the ascertained meaning of the teaching, that we should be able to counteract grasping at self and get rid of it.
That one that some goes to Jenny, young and call it be no meduna and to some goes to any need the machine with that race.
But if we do feel like, you know what, yeah, I have been listening to teaching, I'm doing contemplation, meditation, but really nothing is, there's no effect on my grasping or delusion. Then what that means is that we have not been doing these three things properly. We have not been listening to the teaching properly, we are not doing proper contemplation, and we are not doing proper meditation.
So that the Nimbula Masos that Geshes song is that Nemai Dangzi chair with the data. And da can be children of Shin Juna any social any pig Garsota near the machine taris to some person.
If we find that through listening, contemplation, and meditation, instead of our graspings declining and becoming weak, they become stronger and more dominant and flare up, then that means something has gone wrong in the way we approach our study and practice of Dharma. We have not done the listening, contemplation, meditation properly. Otherwise, that should not, should not have happened.
Then this one, that Geshes song the same show we choose than the dining budget and the sense and never Colon Tenzin Tamper, Dupan, this pay that is Tam Chini. The 7 songs here at Lobos will die in starting to future and Yugina.
And so here, as in the text, it's mentioned that through study, contemplation, meditation, if we feel like that we're becoming more impatient, we're becoming more uptight, becoming more egomaniacs, well, then we are not doing our study and practice properly.
So that they to some was the Lobos will die. Says something in Aranjo, Melam jail. Look, Christian Roshi, Chur London Roshi, then about the some towns. They As we engage in practice, we should also make a proper dedication of our positive actions or merit, that may we be able to direct our mind into Dharma. May our cultivation of Dharma, arise in the form of spiritual path. In other words, let's say, may I be able to direct my mind into Dharma, and may my Dharma practice becomes a spiritual path. Danzi Dadan Zibati, Niebo, that never saw that Tameto Sheragongu was.
So the real antidote to counteract self-grasping is to meditate on selflessness.
This one, Dandy, Gongway the Inida, she now don't Sheneseta. She now the Lepetan, those in the Tonsan in those in Gomni, the Shaviness, Nangi, Data, and Meneva Sheni. She Mason says she said the pay much Kimbu Mazuba, she would think Papa the Tessie, Papa the pay Mamma Zubashin, the Shavina, the T. Pedrega. When she now a tonton Shenes, where don't sound of the gums in Shavina, and the tag there, and a dollar, San Manevashin, no manana, and then Beden, Ben don't like Yan, that job the permanent race. Ben the those truly ya. That the Jalo, the main the Jalo what you use on the Chadgaris.
So we need to meditate on selflessness in order to counteract our grasping at self, because that is the antidote to grasping. But meditating on selflessness does not mean that we kind of block out all kind of external appearances in our mind, and then we kind of put ourselves in an empty mind. Like, okay, all external phenomena are blocked out. So now I'm in kind of a blank state of mind, as if that is meditation of selflessness. No. By blocking out all the external appearances, we put our mind in an empty state. But that our grasping at self has not been counteracted at all, harmed at all, even not a scratch on it, well, then that means we are not meditating on what selflessness actually is. And the example given here is, it is like we put the target in front of us, but then we shoot the arrow backward. Well, of course, it's not going to hit the target. The target is in the front, not behind. But if we send the arrow, in the opposite direction, it's not going to hit the target. So it would just be like that. So what we are really talking about here is that we must be able to identify precisely what is called the object of negation, what is being negated or refuted to realize emptiness or selflessness. As great Shantideva states in his Guide to Bodhisattva's Way of Life, and Geshe quoted the lines from his memory, where he says that if we first don't recognize what is the imputed phenomenon, we even don't touch it, then there's no way to understand that imputed phenomenon does not exist. Okay, so what he's basically telling us is, in order to understand what selflessness or emptiness is, we must understand what is being negated or refuted, the object of negation or refutation, very precisely. Otherwise, we will miss the point.
Zinchuti Hakoguari, Zinchuti Love Heaven Magoguari, Loke Magoguari, Ate Magona, and it eating Tony Dogmaris. That tea paid the young ham, Tandri, Kumanala, Shortly J. Pona Juice, Kumanala Chins and J. Kuma Chins the Naganan Chi, J. said the Pang, Huna Messale, Savina, the Kashikalo Chagar, but then I race.
What is involved in precisely recognizing the object of negation, we call gacha, what is being refuted, in order to realize selflessness, emptiness, is that we have to understand how do we perceive self and phenomena to exist. It's very important for us to precisely recognize the way in which we misperceive actually self and phenomena to exist. And so the way we see them exist is, as a matter of fact, distorted perception, lokshe, a wrong perception. And if we don't recognize that clearly, then there is no way for us to realize or understand how things don't exist the way we think they exist. We won't be able to understand what emptiness is. And an example given to illustrate this point is that if a thief has run into the forest, we are after the thief. But we don't really know exactly what the thief looks like or went into. But if we go and try to find the footprints of the thief on a meadow, right, then we are never going to be able to find the thief. So it will exactly be like that. If we don't understand the way in which we misperceive self and phenomena to exist, we will never understand that phenomena and self do not exist the way we see them to exist.
They Chagu shows Nepal, Nugurtoma, Teneri Chums.
Another example that is often given by the Lamas to illustrate this point is, I think it comes from what the great, the first Dalai Lama, Gyaltsen has said. Let's say if you are going to perform, just to make it simple for you to understand it, because it requires some traditional knowledge here, that in order to get rid of demons, and negative evil forces, right? There are rituals, that we can send ritual cakes to them, and then we ask them to leave, the environment. But to be able to do that, we really need to understand, in which direction we find the negative spirits or the demons. Let's assume that these disturbing beings are in the east. But we perform the ritual cake offering and send all the ritual cakes to the opposite direction, to the west. Well, this ritual is not going to be effective because these beings are not going to receive the ritual cakes. So, that would be a misguided practice, sending the ritual cakes to the west when the devils are in the east, so to speak. So like that, if we don't know what the object of negation really is, then we cannot understand that it does not exist. I think there are a lot of people who are so interested and they say, oh, I'm meditating on emptiness, and they give this kind of a air that, oh, I know what, emptiness is not difficult, it's not that difficult to understand. But emptiness is very difficult to understand. It's not an easy thing. In order to realize emptiness of a particular phenomenon or an object, let's say, we should be able to understand what is the object of negation or refutation with regard to that object or phenomenon. Because if we don't understand the way in which we grasp at that phenomenon or an object to exist, then there is no way that we can understand that our grasping has gone wrong, and we understand the way in which that phenomenon or object actually exists. The point we are trying to make here is that there is a disparity between the way we perceive a phenomenon or an object to exist actually, and the way in which a phenomenon or an object exists in reality. So if we don't understand that disparity, the way in which we see it to exist, and that it does not exist really in that way, then there's no way for to understand the emptiness of that object. So in other words, if we do not recognize the mode of apprehension of a particular object from our side subjectively, then there is no way for us to understand the way in which that phenomenon actually exists, which is the emptiness. So this is the bottom line. If we do not recognize precisely the object of negation called gacha in the theory of emptiness, we will not understand what emptiness is. All the examples we have given is to illustrate this point. For example, we say that the target is in the front, we send the arrow backward. Well, that's not going to hit the target. The devils are in the east, we send the ritual cakes to the west. That didn't work. See? So it would exactly be like that.
the Haku guys. The name Maziba Sene, Yiti, Penapamban, Karina, Yiti, Tomani, Santan the Sani, the time Mandu some year. Ane Gaja can do the 9 time Mandu some sangu at Mato, the Yit San Mandu Sana, Chantal from the way.
You know, it's really, there's, how should I say, risk involved in approaching what emptiness is. Let's take a vase as an example. When we talk about the emptiness of a vase, the first thing we need to be very clear about is that the way in which it does not exist. In other words, the way in which we perceive the vase to exist. Okay? The way we perceive the way to exist is actually the way it does not exist. You know what I'm saying? That's what is called the object of negation. So if we don't understand the way in which we perceive the vase to exist, we will never understand that it does not exist in that way. It exists in a different mode, which is called emptiness. So if we are meditating on emptiness, if we kind of feel like, oh, the vase does not exist at all, well, we missed the whole point. Now we have become a nihilist. We have annihilated even the conventional existence of a vase that we should not have done. Because conventionally, a vase does exist.
No, Tana Hogan, then do Bush. That's Jangu, I live Melam Jenny, Jangu, Karishma.
Chinese to get Shusha.
Larry, Tatenda, there you be.
You can.
They can do that.
Forget everything I have almost again. Get this on the Sunshana.
There you are in the law case. I'm going to
no. Maybe because I like your law. I'm doing
it like your law. Oh, yeah. She gets out of it.
Yes.
From the ships.
So we need to suppose for Edward Manginley.
Oh, yeah, this is okay.
Edward Manginley. Edward Jr., he's 18 years old, and Danny McGinney, 73 years old.
Okay. Tenzin Dorjee, Tom, I'm sorry,
Tom.
Still alive or not?
What is the reason for the prayers? All three?
Okay, that's she gets some to the Kuzako, that's something.
Okay, I have one name here. Bass Lichty passed away, and prayer has been requested for the person. And also, we just want to remind you one more time that thousands of people have died in the cyclone in Burma and in the earthquake in China. And thousands are missing, and thousands are, millions are suffering. So we want to think about all of them and send our prayers, respectively for them.
No. That's the Garanzo Tashinking in the Dendu Tenzin Toyota. Nothing of the Tenzo and the Nasatan retired, and Jenny. Cherries the store and money tenguis.
Let's visualize Chenre Sikh Ari Avalokiteshvara and recite the 6-syllable mantra Om Mani Padme Hum, thinking about people who have lost their lives, and we dedicate our merit for them to find good rebirths and meet with spirituality and so on. And those who are dealing with health issues, we dedicate our merit for them to recover from their sicknesses. And so with that in mind, let's pray together.
Thank you, the church in Shiva gave it all Latini, Sanji Temperament, Taji, and Nebata. And then Jawi, you know, Bichebe, Tinzi Shiva Tomana, Shabi Temper, the 2 Hindu, the Million Yomata. And then Chudungi, and then Ginduvan down, and then show Poman Shundi, Shawana, and Southern Robata. Get each come to the Hindu, Mintibi Gusota, the Kini, Tinchulu, Sota, the Million Yomata.
Whatever merit we have accumulated together this morning, we dedicate it for the flourishing of Dharma, the source of benefits and happiness throughout the universe. May His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all other holy masters live long and be successful in fulfilling their visions benefiting sentient beings. May spiritual communities throughout the world and both monastic practitioners and lay practitioners remain healthy, harmonious, and be successful in fulfilling their spiritual aspirations. May this and other world environments be free of all kinds of unwanted pains and problems, and beings find peace, happiness, prosperity, and spirituality. In short, we dedicate our marriage for all kind mother sentient beings to be free from the fears and dangers of 2 types of mental obscuration, and may we all become Buddhas soon. I would like to announce that I think Geshe has a guest today, so please, postpone your visit to him today.
Oh yeah, you do.
Okay.
So I just have an announcement for people. We are still continuing to send contributions to people in Burma, and as of today, there's been another huge aftershock in China, and so they also are in need. So if you have any contributions, we can send them on to the respective organizations. Also, I would like to say that I've been doing the finances for the last several months, and contributions to the overseas projects continue very well, but every week they're more than what comes to Thupten Darjeeling itself. And Geshe wants to continue to offer the classes for free so that anyone may come to the classes, but we do rely on your contributions so that we can keep up the expenses and take care of the costs here at the center. So in order to keep the classes free, we do rely on people making contributions. So thank you very much.
Come here and also take care of the. I think we are doing the outsiders quite well, good, but the center also we need to think about everybody, think about here also. Thank you.